In the last video, we set up a ball and a floor. If you don't have that open, go ahead and go to File, Open Scene, and then navigate to where you saved your ball bounce scene. It should be in the folder you made and called Scenes, and then whatever you saved it last time. Once you've done that, we're going to start animating it. Animating is actually pretty simple. It's just getting the movements right, which takes the time. I can animate something by going ahead and hitting S on my keyboard for a keyframe. So with that object selected, I can make sure my timeline is where I want it to be on frame 1 and hit S. And then I want to think about how long I want this animation to be. If I want this ball to take about a half a second to bounce back up in the air, I would go ahead and go to, depending, frame 12 or frame 15. And if you don't know what your animation rate is set to, you can click on this little running man with a gear. That's our time slider. Right now I'm animating at 24 frames a second, which is standard for movies. If I wanted to switch to video, I could go to 29.97. It's a weird number, but we just rounded up to 30. A lot of animators like animating at 24 because it means that you have a couple less frames you have to worry about. But if you're someone that works in Ntsc, you may want to go to 29.97. Now, what is Ntsc? It's actually the standard rate for all video in or at least our area of North America, so in America. So when we take this into Premiere, it will want to default at showing it at 30 frames a second. So I usually put my projects to here. Listen to your teacher though on what frame rate they prefer. So I've set my first frame here, and let's say I want this to go ahead and be over here in 15 seconds. I can use the Move tool either by clicking on the Move tool, or I can use shortcut keys. If you put your finger on Q and hit it, that's select. If you go down the line, it's each other tool. So I can go Q for select, W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. And from there, I can move it, and I can go ahead and say, okay, maybe it wouldn't bounce quite as high the second time, so I'll lower it a little. And then I'll hit S on my keyboard. And then I'll know, okay, in between 15 is probably like 7 or 8. I've gone a little slower. I want it to bounce up here, so I'll put it at 8. And I can move it all the way to the ground. Now what I'm doing right now is called blocking out animation. Now, before I hit this key, I want to think about what this animation would look like. I'll show you and I'll undo. If I play this, it just kind of looks like a V falling, right? Here. Actually, we'll go here. This will be it. That's kind of a boring animation, and it doesn't really have any personality. As we talked about, one of the principles of animation was squash and stretch, right? And this doesn't really have much squashing or stretching going on right now. How I can set that is I can double click on this tool, on my scale tool. It will actually work in any move tool, and I can do an edit pivot. And with the object selected, I edit pivot, and I don't want this to squash around the center. I want it to squash when it hits the ground. So I'm going to move this pivot to the bottom. And then once I do that, I can unclick Edit Pivot. And now my tool is here. And to show you the difference of what that will do, if I didn't move my scale tool, it would scale around the center. Now that I've moved the pivot so that the scale tool transform or the scale tool gizmo is at the bottom, if I scale it now, it squishes towards the bottom. So I can reset that keyframe. I can squish it and then hit S. And now, if I click in this front view, you'll notice It's a little more interesting, but it starts squishing before I hit it. I want to look at when I hit it and really have that squish not happen until it actually hits the bottom. So I would go to my 7 frame and I would get the scale tool again. Now I can sit here and try to eyeball this and get it back to 100%. Or I can click on Polysphere 2 here. Actually, that's not the best place to do it. Let's do it in the channel box. I have a scale right here, and I didn't quite get it. It's 0.911 on this Y. Let me click in that Y and hit 1. That will return the scale to its original size. And then I can hit S and add a keyframe at 7. From there, I want this ball to return to its size, and it wouldn't necessarily happen immediately, so probably around frame 9 or 10 is another good place to go ahead and type that scale as 1, and then add another keyframe by hitting S on my keyboard. And now, if I watch this front view again, I have a much more convincing bounce, if it would actually click on it. There we go. See? Blink. Now the other thing I don't really have is I don't have a lot of good arc movement, but we'll add that in after we get this blocked out. So what I'd like you to do now is, using the technique we just did, take some time to get this ball bouncing maybe 3 or 4 times, and then add one element that it could run into or interact with. Maybe that's a basketball hoop. Maybe you want this to bounce through a basketball hoop. Maybe you want it to kind of bounce onto a sphere, like a cylinder. Yeah, like a sphere, and deflate. So think about what you want to happen to this bouncing ball, and then take the time doing what we just did to animate 3 or 4 bounces, and we'll work on refining the animation in the next video.